Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. An accurate crosscut sled, I think, is probably the most valuable jig you can make for your table saw. I do mine a little bit differently. Stay with me, I'll show you how. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new to our channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, which will alert you whenever we release a new video. Anytime we use a new tool or technique, we'll leave a description down below so that make it easier for you to find. All right, let's get back to work. There's more than one way to cross-cut lumber or plywood on your table saw. Almost all table saws come with a miter gauge, which is adjustable, and that's part of the problem with them. Once they become adjustable, they can be knocked out of adjustment. You can also use a chop saw, but I think a shop-made, accurately made crosscut sled is the best for the job, and I'm going to give you several reasons, some you may not have thought of. First of all, the problem with a miter gauge is you're only referencing off of one slot, and what will eventually happen is, or it may happen just when you get it new, is that you've got slop within your gauge. And you can fix that by peening. Actually, this one has little set screws in there that you can adjust so that they stick out and they take up some of that slop. However, you still only have one reference. You don't have a whole lot of surface area here, although you can easily add something to it. But this one I have a lot of complaints about because it just does not tighten up and stay tight. So that I cross that one off my list in most circumstances. Chop saws, they may be good for carpentry, but for furniture, I don't think you're going to find they're as accurate as you want. So why a crosscut sled? Well, for one thing, you can make it as big as you want. They're shop made. Mine happens to be 36, and by the way, I've made several of these. They eventually get beat up and have to be replaced. And every time I do, I try to improve it with something that I've learned from the previous ones. So it's 36 by 23. I have no idea why I came up with a 23, other than really irritating to go to cut a piece of plywood and it's just a little bit too wide. So I made that wide enough that I could get most everything I deal with in terms of length, width. That's actually gives me just shy of 20 3/4 in there. So what I really like about it is A, you've got lots of support for your piece. Like I said, you can make these as wide as you want. B, if you're cutting something really small, you can come, unlike a miter gauge, well, of course you can always put a fence on, but with this, you can bring your piece right, you've got support on both sides. You don't have to worry about that piece getting caught in there because it's going to sit on the table. The other nice thing, if you're having to cross-cut something that's already got a finish on it, the last thing you want to do is run that across your fence, or pardon me, across your table. You never know, there's always going to be some little nicks or glue bobs or something in there, and that'll leave a mark. With a crosscut sled, everything's moving together. This is not moving across the sled, and it's the best way to preserve that. Okay, a couple of points on what makes a good crosscut sled. Number one, you want your fence. This fence has to be perfectly straight, absolutely straight. So if you've got a long straight edge you can put on there, that has to be straight. Number two, you want it to be square to your table. You want that to be standing plumb. And number three, you don't want any slop in your ways. Now if you flip this over, so I've used Osage orange just because it's hard, it wears well, and seems to slide quite easily. And I'll walk you through exactly how I do that, but because it wears, you wouldn't want to use pine underneath here. You want something you're going to get a lot of life out of. But you don't want any side-to-side slop in this. And if you can eliminate that, providing you've got this fence perfectly square to the blade, you're going to be really happy with the way this turns out. So the base is made out of 3/4 inch MDF. You could go with thicker MDF, but you got to remember that the thicker the material, the less capacity you have under your blade. So if you typically have 3 inches and you use a 1 inch sled, now you're down to 2 inches. 1/2 inch, I don't think it's quite heavy enough. So I use 3/4 inch MDF for the actual base. Now, once you use this, you're going to separate these two pieces. So in doing that, you've got to make sure that you've got good support front and back. So I used a piece of pine here just because at the time that's all I had that was thick enough, or pardon me, wide enough. And it has to be wide enough because you're eventually going to use the full capacity of your blade. And when you do, you're cutting into this substantially. So I still have what looks to be about 2.5 inches of material, and that happens to be 1 3/8 of an inch thick. So that is going to do a pretty good job. And these are always glued and screwed to both sides. So down here on the front, on your fence, you want something that's stable, obviously, but you also want something that's relatively hard. It takes a fair bit of abuse. So this is a piece of birch, and I'm using 1 7/16, probably started off 1.5 inches, and this one is 34 1/4 inches long, so I kept it just inside, and that really doesn't matter. It didn't need to come all the way out to there. Now, this one is going to get cut through as well, so by the time I've made a full pass, or a full height pass through here, I've only got 1/4 inch of material left, and that really isn't enough to satisfy me. So what I did is I took a piece of 5/8 inch Baltic birch plywood, and I glued and screwed it to the back side. Obviously stayed clear of where the blade's going to be, and by bringing that up high, it helps to strengthen these two pieces. And because it's in here, it's not in my way, I'm able to lean over and see everything I need to, and I can get my hands fairly close. Something else you want to think about too is oftentimes you're going to want to clamp a stop on here. So it's nice to have the capacity to get a clamp on. That's one other reason why I like to keep this nice and tall. Our first task is to get the base perfectly square. So I've broken this down a little bit. This is 3/4 MDF. What I have is a piece that is 61 by 25. I want to have 24 by 36. I'm going to go just a little bit wider. This is what would normally be a factory edge. This came out of a much bigger sheet. And you can't always trust your factory edge, but I'm going to use it right now to at least get my 36. I'm going to go a little more than 36 because I have to have a little bit of room to adjust. So I'll go 36 1/4. That'll be enough. I said normally you'd have your miter gauge over here and you'd push it through, but miter gauge isn't long enough to engage, so I've got to turn it around and push this against the miter gauge. A little bit of gymnastics involved. Keep that tight. I know that edge is straight. I cut it a little bit wider than I want simply because I had a factory edge, and I always worry about the factory edge swelling up, sucking up a bit of moisture depending on how it sat. So I trusted that edge, and it turned out I was right. Now I'm going to turn it this way, and I'm going to bring it down to my final width, which is going to be the 24. .43 1/16 and 43 1/16. All right, so our base is ready. Okay, we've got all the components. The base, I'll give you these dimensions. This is ended up being a little shorter, but we had to fix it. So we ended up being 35 3/4 by 24. This is our fence. It's actually made out of maple, not birch. I designed this to be just a little bit short. Doesn't go all the way to the end. So this is 35 by 3 3/4 by 1 7/16 thick. That's actually going to have a rabbet cut in it, but we'll do that later. My back piece for support is pine. It's 14 by 6 1/2 by 1 1/2 inch. And the front support piece is 3/4 inch Baltic birch, and that is 11 by 5. I think what I'll do is I'll cut over 3/4. And then we'll trim that to fit. But I've got to switch out my blade. I don't want to try to rip a piece of Purple Heart with a fine tooth crosscut. So, filming? Now I don't know what this is going to do when I cut this piece off. It may twist. So to salvage it, I'm going to set that for 7/8 of an inch, just in case I have to come back in and join it again. And that stayed nice and straight, so I'll cut that down closer. Actually, before I go any further, I'm going to go over and I'm going to hand plane that surface. Okay, that'll be my reference. Now we'll keep easing into that until we finally get it to sit down in there. Now we'll start taking a series of passes, and this is going to be a lot of walking back and forth. Okay, so that slides just the way I want it in both slots. No slop, but it moves. So what we'll do is determine the depth. So that's 7/16. So I'm going to cut these 3/8, and then we'll put a little spacer in the bottom. I'm going to use the bandsaw to cut them. Okay, now that doesn't slide freely. It's a little bit stiff, but that's the way I want it. I'll adjust it from there. Okay, now we need to have this sitting up above the surface a little bit, so what I'll do is cut a couple of pieces. Since we're going to use my fence, I need that fence to be absolutely parallel to the blade or parallel to the miter slot. In use, I always have it so that it's splayed just a bit so that when you're ripping boards, the back side of the tooth coming up doesn't score the side of the wood. So it's a little more open at the back than it is at the front. But I've got to change that, and it's easy enough to do, is lock this in position. I'm going to use my square. And you can hear it hitting the side of the slot. I want it to just clear. Okay, that just clears. So I need to advance this. Not much. Okay, I think that seems to be identical. Okay, I'll leave that right there. Now, with that set, what we can do is put these shims down in the bottom. And then set these in place. And we want to determine where we want this to be glued. And I think 36, just kind of get a feel for it. I usually end up wanting less on this side. So I'm going to set that, I think I'll bring it over right about here. Lock that in place. Now, a little bead of glue right down the middle. Make sure those are in place. Don't want that glue to come too close to the edge. I just don't want have to be digging glue out of the corners. Keep that tight. Now I'm just going to sit here and lean on it, making sure it stays tight to the fence. I'll lean on this for 5 minutes, and then I've got some big hunks of granite over there I'll put on there and use it as a clamp and let that sit for at least 20 minutes. Okay, anything will work. Bags of sand, weights, just enough to give it some pressure until that has a chance to set up. Okay, 20 minutes under a lot of pressure. One of the reasons you want to make sure it's dry is so that when you're pulling this out, you don't accidentally pull them off. Okay, now I'm going to use number 6 by 1 inch. And I'm also going to go in, after I use this counter bore, I'm going to go in and drill an even bigger hole through the Purple Heart. Yet I don't want any threads touching that. And I don't want the possibility of it splitting or even spreading it at all. Not that I think it would. So we'll go about 1 inch in. And then, what do we go? 6, 12, and 18. So inch, 6, 12, 18. That should hold it. Now I've got this set for just a little bit longer than the screw, and I've got plenty to spare. I've got 1 inch and 3. I've got actually I don't have as much as I thought. I've got 3/8 and 3/4, which is 1 inch and 1/8, and I've got a screw that's 1 inch, so I'm all right. So when I put that screw in the hole, as a result of the countersink bit, it's biting into the Purple Heart, and I don't want that. So I've got a drill that's should be the same diameter as the outside of the threads. And I just got to be careful not to. That's better. Now I might have to do this after I've put the fences in place just to be able to hold on to it. I'm going to take my 1 inch chisel. These are IBC, so you can take the handle off. And I'll show you why. I want to be able to hold it like that to scrape any areas where it's rubbing. You got to get the light just right in order to see this. Not right along here. So like a scraper, it'll allow you to take off just a little bit. And this usually takes several trial and error. I don't want to take off too much because then I lose my fit. The idea is to get it just right. I'm just looking for areas where it rubbed enough to leave a little burnish spot. Now as I get closer to having it fit just right, I'll only go in and remove one mark at a time. But it's still stiff enough that you got to go through the whole range of motion because you don't want it to move freely, and then right at the last little bit it sticks. Very annoying when you're trying to make a real careful cut, and all of a sudden you run into that resistance. Ooh, did that at just the right time. So now if I push that over, I'm going to cut this rabbet. There's nothing sacred about this. I'm just going to use it as a reference. I'll cut it to about there. So what I'll do is set the fence for 1/4 of an inch. Bring the blade up just a little. Try that. That's deep enough. And then these edges are parallel, so I should be able to do it from this side. This is my face that we're going to reference our boards off of, so it'll sit like this on the shooting board. So I think what I'll do is I'll reference off of this face and I'll cut a slot back to about there. A second now, let's do this again. Just get some idea. About there. Doesn't need to be very deep. I'm going to do it again just to get a nice check and make sure that's square in case I have to adjust it. Push that down. That's off a little bit. So I need to take a little bit of material off of the inside. Blades always have a tendency to run out ever so slightly. So I'm going to use what's called a 10 1/4 or a bench rabbiting plane. If you don't have something like this, you can always use a shoulder plane. It'll do the same job. This is just a little easier to use. Now I want to cut flush to this side. So what I'll do is, the blade's always a little wider than the body of the plane. Push it so it's sticking out, and then set it down like that, and push down, and now I know it's flush. Check the projection. Now if you notice the shaving is more on the inside than the outside, which is exactly what I want. So we want to clamp down, and we want to clamp this way at the same time. I'll put this one on last. Just a little bit along there. Okay. Now, we'll do this carefully at first, meaning put a clamp this way, light pressure. Just enough to hold it. Then we'll put clamps this way. It's in my way. Kind of have to be clamping in both directions at the same time. Okay, so that'll pull that tight. Then I can pull that one down. Now in the middle, I've got to use a couple of big clamps. Oh, put that down on. Well, here, flip it this way. That might hold better. That can kind of go down into that groove. I'm going to move this clamp over. Pull that tight. And do the same thing out here. That in tight. Now I'm going to put two more clamps on that. Okay. So, okay, now put this one on. Now this is just to offer some support to the two pieces that get separated as soon as you run the saw through them. So I don't have to worry about it being perfectly square like the last one. And we'll just center it using the rails. And I'll clamp that one in place. We'll clean that off once it gets a little bit rubbery. All right, our last piece is that support piece that goes back here. Dale Nish said it was always the best glue spreader. Hand me that block of wood right there. I'll put it underneath that lip. Up. So we'll get one out here. One out here. Now I've only got the two rails, guides that are resting, so I'm going to push right here so that it stays. Okay. Final test. I've got a piece of 1/2 inch MDF. It's laying straight against the fence. We built everything using this square. Right on. What would we do if it wasn't out or wasn't on? Probably start over. Anyway, good luck. Great piece of kit. Probably the best shop-made implement for your table saw. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. Now, I've always said, better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools that we actually manufacture right here, as well as our workshops, both in person and online. Good luck.